Ooh, hello. We're in here today. How odd. How odd. No, but hi, Blue Fleet. Welcome. This is the first time I've done a kind of just chatting stream, I think, isn't it? I don't recall that I've ever actually done one of these before, so I kind of apologize in advance if it doesn't really seem too much like I know exactly what I'm doing, because I don't. But that's never stopped me before. So what we're doing tonight is having a bit of a chat about reading. Fascinating stuff, I know. Fascinating stuff. So basically, I was set a little bit of a challenge by folk. And the challenge was, describe what makes you tick as a reader, right? What do you enjoy as a reader? And I mean, my genre for reading is pretty firmly sword and sorcery, fantasy, Stephen Erickson, R. Scott Bakker, Scott Lynch, that sort of stuff. So what makes me tick as a reader of that sort of thing? What do I enjoy in books? So I'm quite vocal about what I don't enjoy. I think people are more interested at this point, like, what does this guy actually like? Does he like anything? Does he actually like things, or is he just a bit of a knob? And I mean, yeah, I am a bit of a knob, but I do actually like things. I promise. I promise I do. And I think that probably the easiest way for me to kind of evidence that I do in fact like stuff, right, is to name drop a couple of series. So I think for me, the big series in fantasy for reading would have to be Stephen Erickson's Malazan series. Which it still feels odd pronouncing out that, because I always pronounced it as Malazan when I was like a fresh-faced young reader of the series, and it turns out no, it's actually Malazan, as in M' tips fedora Lazan. I know that there are some people in the general reading populace of the series who will tell Erickson he pronounces his own book series wrong, and far be it from me to contradict them. But yeah, that's for me. That's the peak. That's the pinnacle. That's the tip-top series in this genre. Nothing comes quite there. I was about to say nothing comes close. Actually, R. Scott Bakker's Second Apocalypse does come very close in terms of how it's presented, how it's written, and how it's laid out. And not just that, how it makes me feel as well, right? But it doesn't quite hit the same height. I mean, the thing is, Second Apocalypse is a lot shorter. You know, it's 7 books as opposed to 10, and then the 10 books have an expanded universe. Other series that I will shill mercilessly, Crown of Stars by Kate Elliott, fantastic series, very good example of pacing, which I'm going to come to shortly, because pacing is one of my big things as a reader. Like it's probably one of the biggest things actually. There's Lycanius, which I've only read the first book. The first book really kind of impressed me, considering it's not exactly a deep series. It did kind of tick a lot of the boxes for me. There's Wheel of Time. Again, we'll come back to that because pacing is something I'm very, very fond of. I guess those would probably be the big series for me. And then, of course, I am an author myself. I've published a book. I've got another one which has been ready to publish for almost 2 years now, and I've just not sorted the arse out. So yes, I know that the guys on the Moonspawn Discord are going to be like, you prick. Get the book done, get the artwork sorted, and get your book out there, right? They're gonna tell me that, and they're not wrong. You know, I've dallied. The worst thing is I have a guy who said that he's going to do the art for me, and I've just kind of not gotten around to it. So, you know, not ideal, but whatever. I think then the big thing that kind of I look for in a book within this genre is world building. World building is absolutely the most important thing for me as a reader of fantasy. And I tell you why. It's because if your world is not believable, I won't be able to believe it, right? And that sounds like such an obvious thing, but if your world doesn't work, like, there's suspension of disbelief. I mean, there is always going to be suspension of disbelief with this genre because it's, you know, it's a lot of nonsense that we're being expected to believe happening, you know, like floating cities or people conjuring fire out of their hands. or, massive great Magitech constructs stomping around with the souls of dead people inside crystals in the body, or whatever bullshit. Fantasy is a lot of bullshit. And I say that as an avid reader, as someone who doesn't really like genres outside of that, except maybe a bit of sci-fi. I mean, sci-fi's okay. But I guess that the sci-fi irony is not like hard sci-fi, so it kind of is more towards the fantasy side anyway. But if your world is not cohesive, if it doesn't work, then everything will fall apart, right? And I think that's probably why Malazan is the big example of this genre for me, right? It's because the author is an anthropologist by training. I don't know if I'd say by trade. I mean, probably by trade. But, I don't know quite well enough to make that call. But because of the fact that he's trained as an anthropologist, his world is written in such a way that everything slots into place. It's like a giant 1,000-piece jigsaw. And yeah, I mean, you can get a lot of the picture with like half of the jigsaw missing, but there's still another half of the jigsaw to find. Right? There's still another half of the jigsaw to find. And that's massive. I think that's one of the reasons that after I first read that series, everything else kind of felt trite and a little bit weak in that sense. I mean, there's some series which have come pretty close. There's some series that have come pretty close. I mean, I'll be honest, I'm guilty of kind of lazy world building myself in a way, because my world building for my own novels came from a skirmish of Age of Empires 2. That's a bit embarrassing to admit, chap, but it's true. The world building for my own novel series came from a 3-way skirmish on AoE 2 between Vikings, the Spanish, and the Japanese. Sounds crazy, but, it is what it is. But with Erikson's work, you've got not just an ongoing world which is very intricately crafted and put together, where there's history between the nations involved. There's some nations that are unaware of others. There's some nations which are universally disliked, such as the fantasy British, which is fair. Let's be honest, disliking the British is always the correct call from an objective standpoint. But there's also, like, hundreds and thousands of years worth of history in that world. And that is huge. That is huge because you've not just got immediate history, you've got antiquity, you've got almost prehistory. And you've also got races that are old enough in the setting to actually remember the start of that history. Like, you have characters who are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years old. And they've got beef with each other. They've got massive beef with each other. The Teist, for example. You've got the Andii, the Ida. You've got the Leosin, and I mean they're all kind of dicks, but they're also dicks to each other with good reason. They do not like each other one bit. No. And there's a prequel series that Erikson's been working on, which is Karkanas. And that sets out a lot of why the history is as it is. Now, Kark is divisive in the fandom, mainly because it's incredibly dense. Right? It's very, 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 very dense. It's like you're chewing through a brick, but the brick is made of words, and the words are girthy Shakespearean utterances of, like, average sort of 6 syllables a pop. I mean, Erikson, I love you writing, man, but there's a lot of words in those books. No, I actually think that Kark is his strongest work, personally. I think Kark is excellent. What people don't realize about Karkanas is that it is two poets talking to each other. So, from memory, it's Blind Galan talking to Fisher Keltath, telling him the history of his entire race and his people and where they came from and how they came to be in the world that they are. And then you've got a poet taking the words of another poet and transcribing it into a story. And, I mean, of course it's going to be girthy and wordy, but it kind of... it was too much for some people. The unready were too numerous. We couldn't hold them off. And that kind of sucked, but what can you do? If people aren't ready for it, then they're not ready for it. But the point I'm trying to kind of nail down here is that the world is not just very intricately put together, right? Not just very intricately put together, but it's constructed on such a massive foundation. It's almost like an ocean monument in Minecraft, right? So you've got a massive, great foundation of all the history and everything else, and then you've got the other layers built on top of it. And I think if you take much less of an approach with writing a fantasy novel, then subject to your setting, it's going to be very hard to kind of get my belief in it. I mean, one of the quickest ways that you could lose my interest as an author is if your world is just kind of stitched together. If your world is stitched together and it's almost like a JRPG or World of Warcraft's map. I mean, if you remember World of Warcraft's map, you go from one area to another, and the landscape almost completely changes. It's like a quilt that's been kind of badly stitched together. And I say that having played a lot of WoW as a kid and enjoying it, and yeah, I've got a love for that game. But the world was very stitched together, and it was very obviously stitched together. And you can get to that point with books where your world just doesn't flow. And like I say, that's when things completely fall apart. If your world is believable, and the events that have built that world are believable, then it actually follows that the suspension of disbelief is much easier to maintain for a reader. Like, if I feel like someone's just kind of slapped something together very quickly, then the suspension of disbelief, they're going to have a much tougher time keeping me in that suspension. You know, it's one of the reasons that certain very popular series fell very flat on their ass for me. And I'm not going to be negativistic on this stream because I promised Moses that I wouldn't be. But that's pretty much one of the hugest reasons that I didn't enjoy it. So one of the other questions I'd put to me was, how do I approach this? How do I world build? And I suppose that for me, I tried to take the Erickson approach where I didn't just think about who are my characters, what are they doing, why are they doing what they're doing. It was a case of what has brought them here, what events have put them where they are at this point in time. So one of the characters is a mage hunter, and we're actually going to be going through chapter 2 of my own novel at the end of this stream. So I'm actually going to read the full chapter 2 because it's not particularly long, but it's also the excerpt I was going to read is a little bit on the short side, actually. So I thought, well, you know what, you just get full chapter 2, all of chapter 2. Great stuff. We love to see it. But the mage hunter had a backstory in the sense that he's an ex-military man. He was ordered to do something which he fundamentally disagreed with by his superiors, who were issuing these orders on the authority of an invading imperialist force who were trying to basically strong arm and do a demonstration of force to get everyone in line. And he has to live with that guilt, but he also has a lot of resentment towards the Imperials due to this fact. And then I had to think, well, why have the Imperials taken over his homeland? Is it just imperialism? Are they just power hungry? And there's layers to that. I mean, to be fair, if any of my readers are actually here, then, well, you're not going to find out until book 3 comes out. Book 3 is when the big reveal comes, saying why everyone is so interested in that city. But until then, you've got to just kind of wait and see. Anyhow, in terms of the other things I did, I then had to kind of take it and weave. So we've got characters from each of the different viewpoints, but they're kind of aligned in their outlook on a lot of stuff. How do we work that together? Why has the character from the imperialist background wound up sympathetic to the subjugated's background? And then you kind of go on from there, and you look back and build the history of their respective nations. And yeah, there's an antagonistic nation as well who come into play. And then you have to work out what's their beef with each other. You know, how have these nations interact over the course of, say, the last 500 or so years to get them to this point, right? And that's kind of the basis for how I ended up building things. So whilst the initial glut of world building really came from almost a meme source, with the fact that it came from basically a video game, the actual construction of it took some doing. I mean, I started writing my debut in... Oh, man, I had the basic ideas for it going back somewhere to, like, 2003, maybe? I actually started like writing the very first draft when I was still at school. And then I started writing what actually evolved into the published version. It was 2012. That's when I really started working on it kind of hard. So I think it was like 2012 through 2017 I wrote the first one, on and off because of work. But I mean, it took a while to write, and the first year or so was just writing drafts that were kind of really shitty and got progressively less shitty, and then actually constructing a believable world. The problem I had to begin with was that things were happening to progress the story that just didn't kind of make sense. Like initially the Mage Hunter was part of a band of sellswords, and they wound up betrayed by the Imperials for some reason. I couldn't work out any good reason for them to be betrayed. It was supposed to be a revenge story on that Mage Hunter's part, and it never quite took off because there was no good reason for him to be betrayed by the Imperials. I couldn't work out a good... There were probably 1,000,001 ways it could have happened, but none of them made sense in context of the world and the characters. So I then had to look back at the world and say, well, actually, it doesn't make sense for this to happen to him. It doesn't make sense for this character to be the one who simmers over with resentment against the invaders. He still has that. Mostly his resentment is self-centered. He's an alcoholic. He's racked with guilt. He's driven his family away, and he has to live with the consequences of his actions every single day. And that was kind of where I built that character from. Is how has he brought himself to this point? How has he collapsed excuse me, into this glass case of emotion at this point? And how does that affect his ability to function as one of the city's chartered mage hunters? He's effectively magic police. He doesn't have any access to magic himself, but he does have the ability to smell it, which in the setting is not it's not considered a magical ability. It's just something that certain characters can do, and if they have it, they get conscripted. So he didn't really have very much of a choice, but he still managed to drive his wife and family away. So I guess you took the L there, big guy. Anyway, on the same subject, characters, behind world building, characters are essential and extremely important, because you can have the most intricately constructed world, you can have the most believable world, but if your characters are just horribly written or completely unlikable, you're not going to get anywhere. You're not going to get anywhere at all. So one of the criticisms I've seen levied against Second Apocalypse by Scott Bakker is that almost all the characters are unlikable bastards, and yeah, that is very true. Most of the characters in Second Apocalypse are completely horrible. They're just horrifically nasty. You've got Kelhus himself, the warrior prophet. He is excessively manipulative. He has not exactly contempt for mankind, but he just sees them as a means to an end. He is very, very adept at manipulating people and situations to achieve a specific outcome. You've got Nera Sciotha, fantastic character. Hey, welcome. How are we doing? Don't worry about it at all. Don't worry about it at all. All good. So we're just talking about characterization in fantasy novels. I was just using R. Scott Bakker's Second Apocalypse as a good example of this. So Nera Sciotha is extremely polarizing. So he is a barbarian in every sense of the word. He rejects the trappings of civilization. He carves into his skin markers for every single person he's killed, to the point where his arms, and I think his legs, if memory serves, they're just a massive scars, like little notches that he's carved in. And he had, at least in the first book, almost a catchphrase, which was, "Who will murder me? Who is strong enough to kill me, effectively? Who will murder me?" And yet, despite that, he's an extremely compelling character. There's a lot of charisma that the guy has, and it's kind of fucked up how he achieves it. When I say that, I suppose it's more the fact that the character has that much presence, but also he's at war with himself. Like, there are certain words that he uses to refer to himself that I won't repeat here because I will get slapped really fucking hard by Twitch. But he's effectively, I think he's actually bisexual, but that causes a massive conflict in himself because of the fact that his society is a little bit backwards, shall we say. They don't like certain things. So the fact that he kind of goes both ways, he kind of overcompensates on the manly front, but there's an internal war going on there. And it's like, well, actually, I mean, it's not a war I've gone through before, but at the same time, internal conflict is something I'm very used to. It's like, yeah, I can see the character's kind of distress at himself. He refuses to accept himself. I think he does at some point. It's been a very long time since I've read Second Apocalypse, and I really should do a reread of it because it's fantastic. Going off on a little bit of a tangent here, the very last book of Second Apocalypse that's available up to this point, which is The Unholy Consult, when I read that, it ruined everything else that released that year for me. It just flatly ruined everything else. Everything else that came out was kind of shit. By comparison. And like I say this with all the love in the world, but nothing else came anywhere near to that level. It was just a phenomenal piece of writing in every sense of the word. So to try and come away from that and read something else, and I as soon as I finished reading The Unholy Consult, I went on to book one of an extremely well-loved series, and honestly, I think that The Unholy Consult is probably one of the reasons I gave that excessively beloved book that I read afterwards a 1 out of 10 rating. Because it was just so childish and pedantic and shallow. There was no depth to it. There was no depth. So the fact that the characters in Second Apocalypse are as believable as they are, that really helps to alleviate the fact that they're just fucking really shitty people. I mean, the storyline itself is actually not necessarily even that great. Like, the story is largely about a crusade against an enemy, which is, you may as well describe them as devils, right? You may as well describe the consults and the Inkuroi as devils, because, you know, that's it. The way that I took Second Apocalypse is almost like a critique of Abrahamic religion and the Crusades specifically. So the storyline itself is largely just Kellis, the Dunyan monk, wishes to mobilize humanity against an alien menace threat, which is comprised of effectively xenomorphs from Alien, but with pasty white skin, with faces inside their mouths instead of a mini mouths, and who have well, let's just say that they have octopus ink, and we'll leave it there. I don't know how much of Bacca's... Oh my god, it's absolutely horrendous. I don't know how much of Bacca's actual setting I can describe on stream without it sounding horrendous. Yeah, so it's like, you remember how in Alien, they open up the jaws and a little mini-mouth comes out and it's like, hey y'all, I'm gonna snack on you. Yeah, imagine that little mini-mouth, but it's an actual human face there, and the face is the bit that talks. They've also got skin spies, which are shapeshifters, but the way that they shapeshift is their faces are basically like an outward... If you remember the face hugger, how the legs splayed out like that, imagine those are fingers, and they close in on the face of the they close in on the face of the skin spy, right? And when they close in, they vibrate to a frequency where that then becomes a face. It's horrendous. And when they die, the hands unfurl, and there's just this massive flesh underneath with some eyes and a mouth, and it's like, oh my goodness, no. But the fact that he's able to weave really what is essentially body horror into a fantasy setting so well, I think it's casual defacing. That's a good way to look at it. It's like Face Off but worse. It's like Face Off, but you don't have sexy Nicolas Cage to ogle. Ooh. And the fact you can just weave that body horror in there like that, I love it. I very strongly recommend that series. I mean, again, if your characters have well-constructed backstories, that is huge to making them believable. Like you can have a character who has, you know, a bit of a sad backstory or a very basic backstory, like, oh, I'm a farmhand, and now my aunt and my granddad are taking me away because someone's attacked our farm. It turns out I'm the chosen one, Belgarian. I mean, it can work, but it doesn't always work. I mean, sometimes you can have characters with extremely limited backstories or no backstory at all, and it just works. So, I haven't read these books in just a bit over 20 years now, but there is a series by Frida Warrington called The Blackbird Sequence. So it starts off with a blackbird in silver. There was a blackbird in silver, a blackbird in darkness, a blackbird in amber, and a blackbird in twilight. 4 books in total. Has some of the most interesting ideas that I've read in a book. I would almost describe it as like proto-Grimdark, because it's very much 80s, 90s fantasy, but you can really see where it lays the groundwork for stuff that came after in terms of how the setting's constructed, the magic system. But the characters themselves, they're not all that fleshed out. I mean, Istaranel is just a guy from an island that gets attacked by the Serpent and Gulf, and he's just like, well, I'm not happy about this, so I'm going to go donk it. I'm just going to go donk this snake on the noggin, because it's just like attacked my house, and I'm not happy about that. Medrian has a backstory. You don't really find out very much about it, but she's just cold and mysterious, so that kind of works anyway. The only character who's really fleshed out in that sense is Asherak. And, I mean, he is from an evil empire. I think the empire's called Garithria. Like I said, it's been a while. But he is a nasty bastard. He's feared the world over as a bit of a war criminal, actually. And yet, despite the fact he's the only character that is really fleshed out with a backstory, the way that the story progresses from memory is actually really good. My camera's just turned off. Thank you, VTube Studio. Give me a second. I hate when it does this. My camera just turns off for no reason sometime. Right, there we go. Turn that back on. All right, there we go. But then you've got other situations where you've got characters with incredibly fleshed out backstories, and they also work very well. Like Steve Erickson is a very, very good example of this. His backstories for characters tend to be not necessarily elaborate, but they're put together in such a way that the characters will really start to shine. I mean, some characters do get a bigger backstory exposition, such as Beak, and I'm feeling sad now because I just thought about Beak. If you know, you know. But it never gets to the point, like, a lot of the characters in the present point of the setting don't have that much backstory. But the way that they kind of work as a unit of people means they don't necessarily need it, where you've got other characters like Anamanda Rake or Icarium, or, I mean, you can't mention Icarium without Mappo, because they just go hand in hand. But you've got characters like that who have very, very detailed backstory, and you never get it all at once. It's drip-fed to you. But that keeps it suspenseful. That keeps some believability there. And if your characters just kind of do stuff to advance the plot, or they're kind of stupid about things without a reason to be stupid, then it's, again, much like the world building, things will fall apart. Things will fall apart. So, for me, if I'm reading a character, I want them to have either a very strong motive for what they are doing at a given time, or a very strong reason to not be doing things. And I'm just going to go on another slight tangent here just to mention the character of Logan Ninefingers from the First Law, who takes great pains to not get into situations where he is very, very angry. So he's a very, very well-respected fighter, very much a survivor. But if he gets too angry, he goes berserk, and the Bloody Nine comes out. And the Bloody Nine is best described as an alternative personality. But as someone who struggles somewhat with anger issues sometimes, the Bloody Nine and Logan scared the shit out of me, because it's like, oh my god, I know what this is like. So effectively what happens is Logan blacks out, the Bloody Nine takes over, and it's like he's on autopilot. He sees what's happening, but he can't control what's happening. And then, for me, if I lose it to that point, I don't remember what's happened afterwards. It's just a case of I come to an aftermath, and it's been a very long time since I actually lost control to that degree. But Logan kind of made me think, there's a bit close for comfort, mate. There's a bit close for comfort, and that made it believable. And I found myself really sympathetic to him. I mean, the other characters in First Law, again, are largely horrible bastards. Logan is not a good person himself, but he's trying to be. He is trying to redeem himself to whatever degree he can, whatever degree it's possible to redeem himself to. He's trying to get there, right? He's trying to get there. I mean, whether he succeeds or not, you'll have to read and find out, or you'll have to watch the series. I think Netflix are adapting it, or there's a film coming out about the first book in the series. Should be good. I'm quite looking forward to it. But that's the sort of thing I mean. You know, these characters, especially in series like that, their backstories are very intricate. They have detailed histories of how they got to where they are, why are their opinions the way they are, why do they do what they do. And I kind of wanted to take that away and apply that to my own work as well. So we've mentioned about the Mage Hunter. He does what he does because he has to. Really, he'd rather just be drinking himself into a coma so that he can forget what he did whilst he was serving and what he was made to do. But the problem that he's got is that because he is sworn to a particular goddess as a mage hunter, that changed his body somewhat. So it did give him a supernatural resistance to not just toxins, but he can drink himself into a stupor, but he can't kill himself through drink, and he also can't end his own life, and that's something he's tried to do on several occasions because he just doesn't want to see what he sees anymore when he's asleep. And there's a point which I think we'll probably cover when we read chapter 2, but he has noticeable scarring around his neck from the attempts he's made, but he's never been able to succeed despite his best efforts. And it gets to the point where there's a combination going on of an absolute dogged desire to just push on and redeem himself, which is at war with self-loathing, self-doubt, and just a desire to not think again about anything, to not see anything again, just to yeet himself into the nothingness black ocean. And then you've got another character who is a thief. She is extremely uncomfortable to write. So she's a victim of abuse in the sense that she's an orphan who was taken in by a thieving gang. But the thieving gang is headed up by a guy who is basically... he beats people who cross him. And if you try and run away from the gang, then he will just straight up murder. And she ends up with a very nasty case of what I describe almost as Stockholm Syndrome. She realizes that her situation is horrible, but it's also hopeless. And when she is empowered by an artifact which she finds on a heist, the fact that there is a mad goddess contained in that artifact sends her over the edge, and it gets progressively less pleasant to write as the book goes on, to the point where there was one scene I had to write, and if any of my readers are actually in the chat right now, they will know exactly which scene I mean. There is one scene that I had to step away and take 2 full weeks off of writing at all because I had to put myself in a headspace where it was like, what's this character going to do? Why is she going to do this? How is she going to do this? How would she do this? And I had to put myself into her headspace, and it was so mentally taxing to do. But it helped to make the character somewhat more believable, I feel. And I mean, the problem that I then had is that when my wife became unwell in December, and I actually saw firsthand that actually, was I wrong about the progress of a complete breakdown in that sense? Well, no, and that made her even more uncomfortable to write. So kind of a catch-22 for me there, but I think that flaws are something that you need to make sure your characters have. And if your characters are too perfect or they come across as too capable, then it really detracts. Like, I'm gonna drop a name here, the name of the Wind. So I honestly feel that book would have been so much better if the main character wasn't in it. And I get that there's an unreliable narrator thing going on with Name of the Wind, but to me, the main character was too capable for his own good. And it kind of took away from the believability. And I get that the whole point of the story was you got an unreliable narrator telling their own story to someone who's interested. Of course, they're going to big themselves up a bit. But it really detracted. I mean, I kind of argued that that series would be better if the main character just wasn't in it. And considering he's the one telling the story, I'm shit out of luck there. But it was kind of an extreme example. A lot of people very much enjoyed the way that it's presented and how that character presents himself. And I mean, fair play to them. It's just not for me. Yeah, I thought it was all right. I wouldn't say it was a bad book. It was just, like, extremely average in terms of my enjoyment. It was very much a 5 out of 10 for me. Your mileage may vary. I mean, if you enjoy it or you want to read it, go read it, you know. Don't let any of my criticisms of anything ever stop you from doing anything. Because if you want to read something, just go fucking read it, you know. And the same goes for anything else that I'm vocally kind of disdainful towards. Yeah, if I'm vocally disdainful towards something, it just means I've had strong feelings towards my experience with it. Your mileage may vary. Your mileage may always vary. We've all got different engines in the old meat container that is our head, right? That was a weird way for me to word it, but you know what I mean. You know what I mean. Sorry, I got distracted then. Discord is Sakabambaspis posting that weird little fish with the triangle mouth. He's kind of cute in the most fucked up fleshlight kind of way, but yeah, did you know that in terms of human Pokemon? No, we're not doing Vaporeon. Moving on. If flaws are not present in your characters, they won't develop. They won't progress. And if your characters don't develop, return to fleshlight. Oh dear. If your characters don't progress or they don't develop, they are not believable, because very few people in the actual waking world do not progress or do not develop. There are people who will not or cannot for whatever reason, if they're too stuck in their ways or they're just comfortable with how they are. Then yeah, I mean, there are some people who will stay and not really change all that much throughout the course of their entire lives, but most people really change a lot through their lifetime. And if your characters just remain static, you know, almost like, so if we think back to Half-Life, right, and you'd have the security guards who are just stood there, and every now and then they turn around to you and say something, "Hey man, want to buy a beer?" And it's like, that's pretty much how a static character comes across to me. They're just kind of, they're there, they'll say something every now and then, but they never really go anywhere. I mean, Half-Life had to develop Barney Calhoun in his own game and then as a side character in Half-Life 2 to really give him any level of being interesting at all. And even then, he's still not all that interesting. So if your characters don't develop, then they stagnate. And as soon as the character starts stagnating, then they almost immediately become completely uninteresting. Now, there are exceptions to this. If a character is, say, particularly unpleasant, or they have very nasty motives, and those don't change too much, and they remain kind of single-minded and very focused on that sort of thing, then it can work. It absolutely can work. So one example I would give there is, I'm going to have to wash my mouth out after saying this name, but Hugh, give me a second, I need to, fucking hell, disgusting. Yeah. I fucking hate him. I fucking hate Fraser Hugh. If any of you guys have ever read Crown of Stars, you'll know why I hate Fraser Hugh. I actually went on Twitter at one point, and I said to... I've just realised I don't have my alerts on here for some weird reason. Give me a second. Why don't I have my alerts on? There we go. For some reason, I don't have my alerts on my just chatting screen. I've just added it on. Yeah. As you can see as well, we got the little follower bar down here. When we get to 200, we're going to stream Skies of Arcadia. That'll be a laugh. So, with Fraser Hugh, he is extremely unpleasant. I went on Twitter one time and I said to the author, I fucking hate Fraser Hugh. I hate him. And she responded to me and said, good. That means I wrote him right. And that always stuck with me. That really stuck with me. Because he is very much a character you are designed to absolutely loathe. hate with every fibre of your being, right? Hate with every single bit of your existence. And he doesn't really stray away from that. So I've actually not finished Crown of Stars. I've gotten to like book 6 of 7, and then I got distracted by basically VTubing, and I haven't really read too much in that in a little while. But he never really changed that much. He remained very obsessed with the main character, and you learn why a bit later on. But the obsession never changes. His outlook towards that character never really changes. But despite that, he works because you have solid reasons for why he is the way he is. You know, it's not just a case of I'm evil, therefore wahaha for the evils. For the evils is a trope. TV tropes will codify exactly what it refers to, but it's basically characters who do evil things just because. You know, there's no good reason for them to do it. It's just they're just doing it because it's, you know, it's evil. It's fun for them to be evil, right? And there are some characters who work like that, but not many. Most characters who are considered evil, I find they don't really work if they don't have a solid motive for being that way. They kind of fall apart very fast. I think there is an example where it does work. So in the Wheel of Time, you've got the Dark One. I think his name was actually Shaitan, so Satan. The Dark One is evil because it is its nature to be evil. It is a force. It's basically a natural phenomenon, which is, you know, the darkness against light, right? But then everyone who works for the Dark One, or, you know, the Dark Friends, some of them are evil because they just enjoy it. But some of them are evil because they are being, you know, they are basically forced to act this way by something so overwhelming. It's like an eldritch god that is making them do some of the stuff that they do. And that works because at some points you can actually get a conflict between what the person who is evil is doing and what their thoughts are. And I think that particular juxtaposition is really, really fascinating. I mean, I don't want to spoil it, although those books have been out for a very long time, and I mean, there's 14 of them. I've read those books back to back over the course of a year. I say it was actually 14 months. I read one book of the Wheel of Time per month. It took me 14 months to get through them. I didn't read anything else at all. It was just book 1, Eye of the World, through to book 14, A Memory of Light. I didn't read anything else at all. Not even manga. Not even light novels. Just the Wheel of Time. And I think it was worth it. But at the same time, I don't think I'd be in too much of a rush to do that again. But I found the villain characters in that very compelling for that reason. It's hard to emphasize exactly how important believable characters are. As I say, if your characters don't feel like actual flesh and blood people, then they're not going to be too interesting. And if they're not interesting, irrespective of anything else, everything will come crumbling down around you. Everything will just crumble around you. On that point, plot kind of ties into that. So I say it ties into it because you can have an incredible set of characters, but if the plot is just kind of non-existent, they're just going to exist there. They're not really going to do very much. And it's difficult to, hey man, how we doing? Welcome to the chat room. As you can see, I've got my follower bar down at the bottom, so not a good day. Hopefully it's going to pick up for you, but I mean the weekend's coming, so hopefully the weekend will bring you good times all in. So if your characters just kind of sit around, they don't do anything. They exist, but they don't advance a plot at all. Consequently, on the opposite side, conversely is the word I'm looking for. If your characters push along a plot whilst doing it seemingly for really stupid reasons or for convenience, it's also not going to work. There's a very, very fine balance there. So my personal approach was I have an overarching story, and I can't reveal too much about that because it would be a massive spoiler for book 3, and my proofreaders have only read book 2 so far. Out of books 1 and 2, the proofreaders have had. Book 3, they've not seen anything. They don't know anything about this, but the overall sort of storyline as I've mentioned, it comes out in book 3. So I had to work out, how do I drive this story along towards where I want it to go and what I want to be happening. And for me, the way I did this was in authoring, right, there are 2 schools of thought. There are the planners and the pantsers. So a planner will meticulously map out everything that happens, how the story goes, and then it's just a case of writing around that framework. A pantser just wings it. They just like, right, fuck it, Leroy Jenkins, right? And I kind of mix that a little bit. So I plan out major events and I pants the in-between bits. So I kind of idea motor what happens in between those things, and then I will tweak it later to make it all work. And that's a really bad way of doing it, because I keep all my notes in my brain, and as someone with a traumatic brain injury, sometimes brain no worky so good. So, yeah, not ideal. Give me just 1 second, chat. It's getting a bit warm in here. It's getting a little bit warm in this room of mine. There we go. Okay. Sorry about that. That's much nicer. So, in that sense, I had to work out, how do I make these characters get to the major points that I want them to, without it coming off as trite, without it coming off as forced. And if you force characters to do things, again, it is really obvious to a reader. Like, it's insulting to a reader. If your characters do really stupid things for the sake of plot convenience, your readers will pick up on that very fast. And they will probably call you out for it, and rightly so. I mean, I had one character who, one of the very important parts of his development was that someone he cares about gets hurt by his own fault. So how am I supposed to hurt this person and make it his fault, whilst also advancing the plot towards where I want it to go to? And it was tricky. It was very, very tricky. I effectively had to make him not incompetent as such, but a little bit careless in terms of his approach. He's an archaeologist, and he ends up quite severely injuring the person he cares about most through carelessness, through essentially misadventure caused by too much curiosity. And in the first book, to be fair, he's the least popular character. He ranks dead last out of all the main characters in terms of how much the readers actually like him. That's intentional. I actually intended him not to be particularly likable. He comes into his own a bit more as the story goes on, because, again, character development, very important. But he was the trickiest one to actually get to do what I wanted for the plot, whilst also maintaining believability. The other characters have a much more direct interplay with each other. So the main character becomes empowered via magic, becomes a mage, starts to go on a murdering spree. The other main character is a mage hunter, so it's very much kind of like a whodunit, cat and mouse chase going on. And the other character kind of exists outside of that, and his story does cross over, but it takes a while to cross over. So I had to work out, the other 2 characters are really advancing the main portion of the story on. How does the third character advance the story whilst at the same time not forcing advancement to the point where it's obvious that he is existing to push on that side of things? Because it was important to have the overall story protected by that character's existence and to have the overall story advanced by it, but he wasn't important to the overall story of the first book until basically the last chapter is the first time he really factors into the main point of the storyline. So it took me ages to cross over. And bear in mind that my debut is like, if we exclude the appendix at the end for the magic system, it's something like 203,000 words. It's pretty big. And I think that if an author, for me, writes a plot where it's moving along, but it's moving along in a way that's organic, and that it's not happening through the characters doing really dumbass stuff, that's a big thing for me as well. And characters doing dumbass stuff can work, but like if you've got a character who's very, very intelligent and they do something really stupid for no good reason, that's going to come across as obvious. If you've got a character who's a complete fucking idiot and they do something stupid which advances the plot, that works. If you have characters who are a mixture of being very smart and very dumb who fall under a city and eat hallucinogenic honey, then you're at Yucatan. So buckle up. You're going to be tripping balls very soon. Fantastic sequence, by the way. It's from, I think it was from the Bone Hunters, Steven Erikson again. And the honey scene where they ingest, they basically, a bunch of soldiers get trapped underneath the ruins of a burning city, and they're crawling out. That entire section made me really uncomfortable, because the thought of crawling through a cave where you can, like, you know, feasibly you could get stuck and not be able to move and just die there terrifies me. But they kind of they come across this stash of honey and so, oh great, we can actually put some food in us bellies, we can live a bit longer. But the honey is laced with drugs, and they just end up going on a massive acid trip, and it's just a very well constructed sequence all in. I mean, that book itself was fantastic, and I very strongly recommend that anyone who likes fantasy go and read the Malazan books, because honestly, they are the pinnacle of the genre. There's nothing that comes close to them, except maybe Second Apocalypse. And I mean, it's very much like kind of Icarus reaching towards the sun in that instance. I don't mean to put Erikson on a pedestal. I don't think he'd want me to put him on a pedestal, because I mean, he's pretty, like, I don't know if I'd say humble about his work. I'm pretty sure he knows his work is very good, but at the same time, he's not big-headed about it, or at least not from what I've seen. You know, he's very open in terms of his process, in terms of all that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, the core point of what I'm trying to get you to take away from here is go read Malazan. Just do it. I mean, if you can find the books in your local bookstore, just buy them. If I could get them all in hardback, I would. Pacing is the next point on my notes here. So I think that Moonspawn will know very keenly that I hate to be rushed as a reader. If anything pisses me off as a reader, more than anything, it's if the author barrels along at 1,000,000 miles a second. And I mean, I hate to say this, but there's a side series of books in the Malazan world, which is not by the primary author, it's by the secondary author who helped to co-create the setting. But the most recent ones, which are a prequel to the immediate events of the main series, they go so fast that I ended up dropping the series. I couldn't cope with the pace being as fast as it was, because it was, to me, it's like you've got these massively important events in a setting, we're just flying through them with probably about the speed of the Battle of Five Armies. And if you think of the Hobbit films, right? Think of the Hobbit films. The Battle of Five Armies was an entire fucking film on its own, right? It was an entire movie just dedicated to that event and what happened afterwards. In The Hobbit, the book, the Battle of Five Armies is like a paragraph. It's like one paragraph. I'd rather not think about those. I mean, honestly, they were enjoyable for what they are. I enjoyed the Hobbit movies, even if they weren't close to the source material. I thought they were okay. I mean, they were a spectacle. They were a way to waste sort of 3 hours, right? But the Battle of Five Armies in the book is one paragraph, and the paragraph goes something like, and all of these five armies attacked each other, and then Thorin Oakenshield died, and Killian Philly died, and everyone was very sad, and then the Hobbit went home with the dwarves and some bullshit. And it takes like, what? It's like 5 lines worth of text in the book, and that's it. That's all you get for that. And you get some books where I think half the problem is that, and I'm going to use the term Moonspawn, don't at me, overt brevity. My nemesis, my behated, overt brevity. I dislike this idea that authors need to be extremely brief in description and that the reader has to fill in all the blanks. It's fine to leave some of that to the reader, and I'm not going to say that the reader should be denied their agency in this, because if a reader wants to headcanon how a character looks or what a setting looks like, then minutiae of detail is sometimes a hindrance. So Wheel of Time, much as I love it, very heavy on the description, and it's one of the main criticisms that the series gets levied against it, and probably for good reason. You know, I mean, Mr. Jordan, may he rest in peace, loved his descriptions. He absolutely loved to describe things, and I enjoy that. Some people do not. But there's a trend in the opposite direction where books are very light on description. There's almost no descriptiveness to what's going on, or events happen so fast that it feels like I'm barreling along like I'm on a roller coaster, and I really don't like that. I hate feeling like I'm being rushed. I hate to feel as though things are too fast. I mean, I'm probably more at the other end of the spectrum on this, in that I like Malazan, I like Second Apocalypse, I like Wheel of Time, I like Crown of Stars. All 4 of these series are glacially paced. They're very slow. And I love them, but they are very, very slow. They move with all of the speed of effectively a herd of elephants taking a long wander, and they are inexorable in the same way. They will trample over anything in their pathway, but they're not going to do it very fast. They're not going to do it very fast at all. But I like that. You know, I like the fact that there is next to no rushing. And sometimes they speed up because the action at the time demands it. So in a battle, for example, or in an escape sequence, sometimes they will pick up the pace quite noticeably. But they never rush me. And I really, really, really... I mean, it's not just in reading. I hate to be rushed in general. One thing I dislike in certain video games is timed sequences. So if you've got a time sequence where you're being rushed to do something within a time limit, then I'm not a fan. I like that kind of do stuff on your own time mentality. Like you get with stuff like Minecraft when you're not saying somewhere too dangerous, for example. So if your pacing is too quick, it's going to piss me off. If your pacing is moderately quick, but it doesn't feel like we're just barreling along for the sake of ticking boxes, I'm going to enjoy that. And I think the slow plot gives more opportunity for character development a lot of the time as well. I mean, it's not always the case. You know, you can have a situation where you've got a character who is being dragged along a very fast series of events which have a very profound effect upon them. And I can certainly dig that. But generally I like the pacing of books to be slower, and I like them to take their time to develop, like a fine wine aging in a barrel, for example, like a fine wine just aging away, and then you get to a point where something big happens, and it's like you're cracking open a cask, and it's like, I've got notes of cognac and vanilla and whatever bullshit. Delicious. It's like aging your scene almost. I think really we've been kind of talking bullshit for an hour or so, but that's probably covered everything that I really dig about sort of reading and books. A lot of rush stories are so because of publishers, editors getting cancelled, getting dropped. Yes, now. Oh boy. Oh, you fucking done it now, mate. Okay. So, there is a bit of an issue in the sense that publishers dislike big books, right? And I found this out firsthand because I've written a big book. My debut is a doorstopper. And they dislike big books because big books take more money to publish as paperback. Not as ebooks. Ebooks, it doesn't really care. Yeah, I found that out to my own peril. No one will pick up a big book by a new author. I know. I've been in that situation. I did actually have a publisher at one point, but the deal kind of fell apart due to things with the publisher themselves, which were outside of my control. And I'm not going to go into that for, the fact that it's in the past. There's no point fretting over it. And it didn't cause me any harm. I didn't lose any access to my book or my IP or anything, right? But publishers do not like big books. What they want is they want small books, like normally about 70,000 words, which to me is a novella. 70,000 is not novel length in my opinion, but that's just me. And they also don't like stuff which is complex. They're like very, I would say, watered down, overly fast paced, easy to digest pulp. The sort of stuff that is very easy reading, but almost like light novels. And if I read light novels, I've got an entire bookshelf upstairs of light novels. But I very rarely... Yeah, that's just it. Yeah, I mean, spending money on books is a gamble. And I'm not going to try and deny that. If I fancy reading something quick and straightforward and brainless, I will read a light novel, right? right, I'll read a light novel, and I quite enjoy brainless light novels because they, no thoughts, head empty, they're fun. But if I'm reading my sort of home genre and I'm reading full-size books, I don't want to no thoughts, head empty. I like to be made to think. I like to wonder what's going on. I like to form my own conclusions rather than have my hand held. And, I mean, this isn't in my notes, but that's another good point. Authors who do not hold your hand, who just throw you into the middle of an ongoing world and they leave it for you to figure out what's going on. They trust that you as a reader will understand what's going on and be able to work this out. I love that. I love that. He loves it. I love it when an author just says, here's what's going on at the minute. And they don't tell me why. But they hint as to why as the book goes on. So that's something that Erikson is absolutely adept at, is the first book, Gardens of the Moon, throws you into the middle of an ongoing story. You've got no explanation as to what's going on. You do get clues as to what's going on throughout the book, but you as the reader have to put that puzzle together. And I found that incredible. The first time I read that book, it was like, what the fuck's going on? What is happening? And I didn't exactly understand it, but I didn't really care too much. And you don't often find out exactly what's going on until much further into the overall series. Like, there's a couple of points where the series will just shift to a completely new setting, seemingly for no reason. But there is a very good reason for it. You're just not privy to that reason at this point in the story. And I love that. I love the fact that not only does this author trust me to work out what's going on my own, he also trusts that I'm going to understand that there are certain things in this story I am not meant to know about yet. And there are certain things in the story I am not entitled to know about yet. I will get to that later, but at the moment, it's not going to be explained to me, and there's a chance it may not be explained to me. And that was a huge thing, like not explaining everything to a reader, not explaining every single thing that's going on to a reader is a huge, huge endeavour of trust. I don't know how else to term it. The author trusts you to stay on board despite the fact they're not telling you what's going on. They're leaving it to your imagination and to your thinking to work out what's going on. That's huge. There's not very many books I'm aware of which will actually do that. I mean, as much as I love Second Apocalypse, the exact objective of exactly what the main characters are doing is normally pretty much written in stone. You're told it very early on, but the characters and the way they go about doing things are engaging enough that it doesn't really matter. One more thing that makes books hard to get into. I'm all ears, my friend. Is it the stiffness of the spine? Oh, that was a terrible little joke on my part. Go men are sorry. I'll tell you what, whilst you're typing that up, let me take a quick swig of my bevy. Let's see what you got for me. Now, yes and no. If the story is part of a larger series, I feel like it is harder to keep up to date, honestly. I mean, to a degree. To a degree. If you read an entire series in one go, not too much of an issue. I mean, I suppose that my brain injury makes things a bit different for me in the sense that my memory is really weird. So I have incredibly bad short-term memory. Like, don't ask me if I've locked my door, I won't remember. If I read a series, then I will remember what is going on at any given moment and what has happened at any given moment, and I can just recall everything that's gone on up to this point. So I've got a bit of an unfair advantage there. If a series is still ongoing, then yes, I can definitely appreciate that. So one of the things that some of the reading groups I'm in suggest is recap on a book. So if a book has a brief recap at the start of it, that's kind of nice. That was something I think... let me just check, actually. I'm pretty sure the book is in my drawers here. Hold on a second. Let me just have a quick look. Yeah, here we go. So, An Echo of Things to Come by James Islington, Book 2 of Licanius. So I'm just having a quick look here. Yeah, so I'm just looking at the book here, and there's something like... there's about 20 pages in this book which are just the author recapping what has happened up to this point for us. So the author is recapping everything. Yeah, I mean, that's... mangas are quite easy to catch up on. Books, less so. They expect you to retain a lot. I think that Islington has a good way to deal with this, in the sense that, like I said, he's put a recap at the start of the second Lycanius book so that you can see what's happened. So if you come back to the book after, say, a year or two away reading other stuff, it's like, oh yeah, this is what's happened. Yeah, I mean, not many people have time to reread, so recaps are definitely very nice. For me, not necessary, but again, that's, I think, a function of my brain injury and what it did to my memory. And I don't expect other people to have the same level of memory that I do. Sometimes my memory is not exactly eidetic, but it's close. So I can recall events and things from when I'm extremely young with immense clarity. It's like I'm there. Every now and then I flash back to places I've been to, and my wife's like, "You're looking kind of distant there, Hubs." And it's like, yeah, I was a million miles away. I was flashing back to somewhere. So it helps with remembering what's going on with books. I think that books that give us a bit of a recap, I like that. I really like it when a book gives a recap. Not for me, because I don't read them. But if a book gives a recap for other readers, then as an accessibility tool, it's pretty good. I don't use it myself. Because I take the approach that I trust my readers to remember what's going on. Plus, my story is not exactly complicated enough, I feel, to warrant a recap. I mean, my story is very straightforward, so there's a bit of an advantage there, right? Bit of an advantage, but for the people who need them, it's real nice to have them. And a lot of books that don't have them, you can find recaps online. So if you come back to a book series after a bit of a time away, you can have a look. I'm up to, say, book 3 of 6. Okay, here's what's happened in book 1 and 2. And it just gives you bullet points on the major events, refreshes your memory a bit. You're good to go. But, I mean, there is a problem in the industry kind of related to this, in the sense that you get people who say, I'm not going to read this book yet because it's marketed as the first book in a trilogy. I'm going to wait for the other ones to come out. Now, the problem there is that if you don't buy the first book because you're waiting for the rest of it to come out, if the first book doesn't sell, the author will be dropped by the publishing house. Yeah, the problem is the author will be dropped by the publishing house if that first book doesn't sell. If they don't sell enough of that book, the publishing house will drop them. And then you don't get any more books in that series. And for some people, it doesn't matter because you've got other authors coming out who they can read instead, and they're not really invested in it. But if you get... Yeah, I mean, if you get to a point where the author's book isn't selling, and I've seen this unfortunately happen to friends, where they've written a really cool novel, but because it's the first novel in a trilogy, it doesn't really sell that great, because people are waiting for the rest of it to come out. But then the publisher's like, your book's not selling, we can't keep you on because, you know, you're not shifting units for us. And that gets you into a position where there's no winning, because you can't shift to the punters if you don't have the rest of the series out, but the publishers won't keep you on because the punters aren't buying. You know, I was almost tempted at one point just to release my series as a completed set. I mean, mine's projected at 4 books. It might extend to 5. Oh, that sucks, yeah. Have you tried 8 books? 8 books is a very good second-hand book resource, so you might have some joy if you look there. I'm just going to throw that out there. If there's stuff that I can't find, or specific book covers I can't find for whatever reason, it is something I use frequently enough. Import. Well, import and shipping. Well, hold on just a minute. I'm going to have a look. Right. So, Tensura Vol 1. Alright, let's see. Let's see what comes up here, shall we? Let's see what comes up here. Hang on, what is Tensura anyway? Oh, the time I got reincarnated as a slime. Right, let's have a look. Ooh. Okay, yeah. Yeah, I mean, the average cost of Volume 1 there is like, including shipping, 20 odd quid. You could get it yeah, that's actually pretty brutal. It's a crapshoot sometimes with stuff. It's a crapshoot, but yeah, it's I do see your point there, man. I do see your point, and I think that it's definitely worth looking at all options. Like, if you can find a decent bookstore which will order it in for you, I'm quite lucky in the sense that I haven't been there for a while. I tried to go there with Bree last Sunday when we were in Sheffield together, but it was closed, unfortunately. But there's a comic book shop called the Sheffield Space Centre, and if I want anything ordering in, I could go to the Space Centre and say, guys, can you order me this? And they've done that for me before. They've put stuff on to order for me before. Phone me when it's come in. And yeah, like I say, I'm lucky because it's not local to me anymore because I don't work in Sheffield now. But it's local enough that if I wanted to go and special order something, I could. I mean, if you wanted to buy it in English, then it's probably not infeasible to, man. It's probably not infeasible to. That time I got reincarnated as a slime. 1. Let's have a look elsewhere. So, I mean, depending on whether you wanted the manga or the light novel, there are options to get it in English. The only problem you then have is international shipping, like you say. It's not ideal, but I guess it's one of those things where you have to sometimes just take a punt on it, right? I mean, for me, I tend to buy stuff from bookshops directly. Charity shops are a really good source of novels, actually. I mean, if I go to see my mum, she lives not too far from London, but she's got this excellent little charity shop. I think it's a YMCA in her town, and they have like 5 for a quid on paperbacks. So you can buy 5 paperbacks off them and it'll cost you £1 English. Just £1 English. Last time I was at my mum's, I came home with something like 15 books. 15 books from charity shop. I spent like 3 quid on it. And they're not exactly amazing books in the sense that, you know, they're quite like middle of the road fantasy books. They're ones I want to read. Like they're on my list to read anyway. So diving into second-hand shops is a legit shout a lot of the time. Honestly, well worth looking into. Another thing is that you can never quite say what you will find in a second-hand shop. So you could find tons of good stuff. You could find nothing. A lot of the time, if I go charity shop diving, I don't find anything, and that's fine. But there's other times, like I was in Leeds at the I think it's the Merrion Centre. There's the British Art Foundation there, and they had loads of stuff. And the only reason I didn't buy stuff then was because I was going to a concert, and it's like, well, I'm gonna have to lug all this shit into the concert with me. I ain't doing that. So you have a wild variation on what you might find at any given moment in a charity shop, but it's definitely a shout. I mean, I will keep an eye out for copies of that book. Remind me every now and then. I'll keep an eye out for copies of it, and if I find a decent copy of it, then I will ping you on the old Discord. No promises, of course, because you know it depends on if I can find it at all. But wow, that novel's almost 10 years old. Impressive. Oh yeah, I didn't realize it was that old. I honestly did not realize that novel was almost 10 years old. But well, there we go. I don't think there's too much else that I have in terms of reading in that sense. So where are we? We're an hour and 15 in. It will probably take us a little while to get through this, but like I'd said before, we are going to be reading through the second chapter of my book. Now, this is available on Amazon. However, it is published under like my actual name. So I'm not going to name drop it here. Because it is a docs, right? However, you will find enough stuff in here that if you really want to search it out, then you will be able to. I'm just going to see how long this section is. Let me just run a quick word count on it. So this particular section is 11,500 words. This is an excerpt. Get out. Why have I done this to myself? No. Okay. It will be a good test of endurance for my voice, and a good test of whether or not my stuff is actually any good or not, I guess. So, you know, feel free to jump in with any particular commentaries, but in this chapter, this is the chapter that introduces the Mage Hunter to the story. I can imagine that some of my readers from the Discord will probably come back to me and say, "You're pronouncing that name wrong. Shinsu, you're not pronouncing the name wrong." You're not pronouncing the name wrong. That means I'm pronouncing it right. What's going on? I need beer. I desperately need beer and coffee. Coffee beer. Coffee beer would be lovely right about now. Only problem is I can't really afford any more coffee beer for the minute. So I've just got to kind of make do with what I've got, which is actually my wife's gin cabinet, and she's got a lot of good shit in there. So I might treat myself to a gin after. Oh, you notice what happens with my Cerata then? Hold on a minute. Watch this. Watch this. Watch this. You see that? That little one on the right-hand side of my head, so your left. I raised my eyebrows and the Cerata... That's just kind of tweaks there. Yeah, the Cerata are an item scene. They're not actually attached to my avatar model. They're an item scene. But I think that one... yeah, that specifically... That one on the side of my head there is it's linked to the back of my right eye. That's very stupid. Very stupid. Alright. So yeah, we will begin the reading now. I'm probably not going to respond to chat whilst I'm reading this, so please bear with me on that front. If you've any particular comments to make on it, then I will try and read them as we get to the end of the reading, but might take us a little while to get through. Please bear with me. I hope you enjoy this. As I say, this book took me 5 years to write, edit, and publish, so it's a pretty big chunk of my life went into this. Please be kind to me. Please be gentle. But anyway, I'm stalling, so I will now begin. Me. The coming dawn had parted the previous night's fog, a veil being lifted from the face of the city. The twins still lay in slumber beneath the horizon, though there was a slice of deep blue emerging, signalling that soon they would awaken. A small clock within the little room chimed 4 times, and then was silent again. Skjöld never truly slept. The hulking man sat at the desk was poring over a report by the light of a candle which had burned nearly to its base, occasionally tugging irritably at his thick, wild beard, or murmuring to himself in a tone that said he was less than happy with what was before him. The sour aroma of warm ale wafted from a mug that sat not far from the edge of the desk, empty now, but stained with the odour for repeated use. There were empty bottles on the desk's edge that sat against the wall too, each one adding a steadily diminishing note to the room's miasmic flavour. Beyond the arch-shaped casement window, an Etherean airship rumbled past. An odd time of day for one of their bizarre sky galleons to come to dock, but then the Imperials pretty much did as they wanted. It wasn't his place to question, and so he didn't, doing as most of the city did and stifling his resentment deep down inside. The numerous iris embedded deep into the keel of the airship emanated a dull, off-white glow that thrummed and pulsed rhythmically until it had vanished from sight. Shroud Herrick paid the airship no heed. The report before him was a cause for concern, rumours of a rogue glyphcaster moving through the city's poorer districts. There had been no reports of any unusual deaths from those areas as of yet, but it would still need to be looked into. Not all glyphs killed a man in a spectacular manner. Some killed in the same manner as a poorly swallowed bone or a sword did. He would have to see one of his lads take a look into it with the watch. Mogan would do. It was about time the lads saw some of what their order was about. There were many names for them, but only one had found usage among the commoners of Skjöld, the Umbral Shields. In truth, they were the sworn brothers of Umrata, Angels of Darkness, but being known as the Shields of Shadow had been a badge that the Order had been happy to take on. After all, were they not the guardians of the Lady of Darkness herself? Thoughts of his mistress now occupied Herrick's mind, despite the alcoholic haze that had settled across them. It had been 2 days since he had last gone and meditated upon Umrata's statue within the yard of their compound. He had been remiss with his oath recently. The news that his former wife and his 2 sons had been seen in Stanner's Pass and were rumoured to have taken up residence with the blacksmith there was still a fresh wound. The thought of his sons being raised by another man made him sick to his stomach, and was one reason he had taken to drink again. Prayer had brought him no peace that a bottle hadn't been able to instill in him. "Ah, it's a carcass pit with this," he growled in a deep bass rumble. "I'll pass it to the pup when he's up." Mogan was a junior within the order. He had not yet undergone the rituals that allow him to function easily, with only a little sleep each night. Soon, though. He would need to be sworn soon, or he might never receive the Ageless's blessing. Standing and rolling his broad shoulders, Herrick cracked his neck to one side and tucked the report into a pocket. There was an effort to keep his booted footfalls silent as he left the room that functioned as his office and strolled slowly through the Order's library, heading towards the courtyard. The library was large, though not so unendingly vast as the one that sat within the highest, the Skirly Fane taken over by Ethereans and forming the centre of the city's government, not too far from here. The tomes and scrolls in the Shield's library mostly concerned the Ageless, as well as matters pertaining to war, combat, and philosophy. The Umbral Shields were a martial order, unlike most groups sworn to a particular Ageless, training with both blade and book. Knowledge was as much a weapon as a sword in Herrick's eyes, and it was one reason the order had been preserved by the Ethereans upon their takeover of the Northlands. As he neared the exit, his eye was as always drawn to the banner depicting the Wheel of Elements hanging on each side of the doorway. There was a saying within the order: know your quarry. As mage hunters, the Umbral Shield's prime duty was defending skill against errant glyphcasters, those using their gifts to circumvent the law, to cause mischief among the city walls, even the surrounding area. To hunt a glyphcaster, one had to understand them, and their element. There were 12 elements pictured on the astral map, arrayed as a wheel whose spokes appeared much like that of a wagon, 8 spokes crossing the circular design. At the end of each spoke sat a small circle bearing a glyph, 8 in total, representing the schools of Elementi. Halfway to the middle point was a smaller inner wheel, intersecting the longer spokes. The 4 circles sat upon the inner wheel, where it met the diagonal spokes, were slightly larger than those on the outer ring, representing the schools of Obscuri. Numerous smaller spokes crisscrossed the map, giving it the look of a star, and at the very centre of the diagram was a black sphere, larger still, representing a 13th, unknown, and thoroughly forbidden element. The Umbral Shields were aspected to darkness, and Herrick's garb reflected this, consisting of a black, long-sleeved tunic and black trousers of finely woven wool, which were tucked into equally dark boots of heavy leather. When he left the compound, he would don blackened leather armour and a cloak that seemed to be sewn from a shadow itself. The huge Skirly always felt naked without his bastard sword, which hung in his chamber. There were those among the Order skilled in magic, although Herrick could not count himself among their number, and ironically, not a one of them could cast from Umrata's glyphs. A small balding man crossed his path, almost jumping out of his skin. "Oh, Herrick, you startled me," the newcomer stammered. "I wasn't expecting anyone to be awake at this time. How goes it?" "Aye, not bad, friend George," Herrick said. "I've not time for sleep. Still got reports I'd like to deal with. I was headed to the yard for a while." "Ah, very good," the diminutive librarian and longest-serving Umbral Shield said with a nod. His head seemed to bob on his neck with the movement. "Perhaps I could walk with you for a time." Herrick nodded and put his hand on the old man's shoulder. "Aye, George. I think I'd like some company about now." "I heard about what happened, Herrick. Truly, you have my condolences. If you need to speak of the issue, then you might come and find me. The Ageless know I have enough time to spare these days." George's duties as the compound's librarian kept him busy enough, but for a man who needed less than 4 hours of sleep a night and no longer went beyond the complex walls in any official capacity, there was still enough empty hours in the day that he was free to pursue his own interests as well. "I might take you up on that, George. Not right now, though. I need a bit of time to digest it all. I'm sending Morgan to deal with rumours in the slums. Not really sure what to make of it, to be honest. Could amount to nothing, but then again, could be trouble we could knock on the head sooner rather than later." "Have you been drinking again, Herrick?" "You know how that ends with you. Do you want to—" "Give over, George. I don't want to talk about it just now." "What do you think of Morgan handling this one?" Though the old man was the Umbral Shield's librarian now, he was a man whose opinion carried great weight behind it. George tugged at the long thin wisp of a beard that hung from his chin with his right hand. He tended to keep the left hand tucked away within his dun robes, for many years ago, when he had been a shroud himself, it had been horribly maimed whilst hunting a thoroughly mad glyphcaster of flame and now resembled the stumped, mangled foot of a pigeon. Though the injury had been attained whilst doing his duty, George still considered it a source of shame, as much for the perceived failure which had allowed to happen as for the visible disfigurement. "I think the lad is ready, Herrick. And who knows? Perhaps this will be what caused him to finally begin to take his duties more seriously. Morgan had already acquired a reputation for his lackadaisical attitude, and it was a reputation the lad seemed eager to cultivate instead of attempting to disprove it. George's comments had Herrick humming his agreement. I bloody hope so. The angels know how many times I've had to remind him while he's been out with me there's no place for being lax within these walls. Give the lad time, Herrick. You weren't so different when you came here yourself. Herrick grunted, a sound that might have passed for either mild irritation or subtle amusement. I remember all too well those clips around the ear you gave me, friend. He smiled warmly through the mad curls of his dark beard. Maybe you should give Morgan a couple. The angels know it worked on me. You remember how I was as initiate. George's answering smile was equally warm, almost fatherly. It's not my place to teach the lad his place. You're his shroud. As he obeys the captain, so should he obey you too. I might advise him if he ever should come to me, but you know my words hold no actual power beyond the running of my library and the care of my books. Their walk took them through the main gathering hall, bedecked in banners emblazoned with Umrata's glyph, overlaid with the Umble Shield's own emblem, a grey shield standing before a pitch-black background, the shield also bearing the Ageless's glyph at its centre. There were rows of pews here, where the Order's shield brothers would congregate to meditate together. Each Umble Shield was given time during the day during which to meditate, and many chose to do it together. There was also a stairwell leading up to the living quarters. The captain's room sat at the very top of the building, occupying the entire 4th floor, with his 8 shrouds, the chaplain, and George sharing the 3rd. The Shield Brothers' quarters were found on the 2nd floor, most of the men sharing a room with at least one other. The initiates bunked up in groups of 4 whilst they underwent their tutelage, never more than 16 within the Order at any one time. In total, there were perhaps 90 Umble Shields living within the compound. The servants and custodians lived in a separate building, just across from the main entrance. Eventually, they reached the high, arched oak door which opened out onto the courtyard, sat within the compound's entryway. As Herrick reached to open it, he felt George's hand on his shoulder. Go carefully, Herrick. I don't want to see you destroying yourself again. The Ageless know you and alcohol do not mix well at all. Herrick grimaced but bowed his head. I'll do my best, old friend. No promises, beyond that I'll try. I suppose that's as much as I'm going to get? Aye. George's stare locked into Herrick for a short moment that seemed to stretch on for much longer than it did. His piercing eyes looked away only when he realised that Herrick wasn't prepared to give more than he already had, and the old man let out a breath that was not quite a sigh. Well, peace to your friend, Herrick. I'll see you upon the morrow. Aye, George. Rest well. I'll see you come morning. George's soft footsteps on the tiled floor as the entry echoed gently until fading entirely from earshot. Herrick knew the librarian was right. His self-destructive streak was amplified by drink, but then, without drink, he struggled to cope, both with the news of his ex-wife, and the memories from his time as a soldier with the Skilly military. One day, most likely, his drinking would kill him, or so he'd been told. Excuse me. The oath may have protected his body from the excess, but he didn't know how long that would last, or if it could protect him against such prolonged abuse. Once there was a drink in his hand, though, he didn't care. The night's cool air caressed his face as he opened the door into the yard. The space was wide, with pathways leading through the rows of plants. In the middle of the yard was a clear circular space marked with a ring of small rocks. Here, the Shield Brothers could practice their martial skills. It had been a while since Herrick stepped into the circle. Maybe he'd look to make time for it soon. His swing was getting a little rusty lately. Brock was always up for a spar. He would have liked to see him out over the coming days, once his friend had returned from Hilliker's Point. Umrata's statue commanded attention. The Aegis had been stylized as a woman dressed with a long cloak that brushed her ankles, the cowl pulled up and hiding her face within shadow. When there was light enough to see the face, it was apparent the eyes were closed, the statue's expression sorrowful. One hand was hidden from view, the other preferred, a gesture that would have seemed more welcoming if not for the sense of melancholy that the statue's face imparted. A plaque, engraved with old Scioli runes, sat underneath, the words weathered, but known to Herrick nonetheless. They were the words of the oath that each Umble Shield swore upon attaining their place with the Shield Brothers, words that would burn into each brother's mind for the rest of their lives. He knelt down before her, sitting back on his heels and resting his hands upon thighs, closing his eyes, breathing deeply, slowly. In spite of the mournful aura given off by Umrata's statue, there was peace to be found here, a rare respite from the demands of his duties and the horrors that still stalked the corridors of his mind. Remnants and revenants of a life left long in the past that remained to haunt his every waking moment. Time spent in meditation was time that Herrick was free of those tormenting memories, an escape for actions conducted in the name of his homeland. Such thoughts evaporated from his mind as he breathed deeply of the night air, and settled into a restful meditation. And for a time, Shroud Herrick was at peace. I think I'm going to actually go to the dream sequence at the end. There's a lot of text to kind of burn through here. And I kind of feel like my voice is not going to hold out for all of it. But the dream sequence is quite fun. Like when I write dream sequences, I switch to first-person present tense. So we go away from third-person omniscient to first-person present, and yeah, we get to look at some body horror. So let me just have a quick swig of my drink here, chat. So this was the section that my readers actually wanted me to read to begin with. I wanted to kind of set the scene as to how I would paint a scene. And I certainly appreciate my style is very purple. It's not going to change. That's how I write. You have to deal with it. Okay. So, at this point, Herrick is asleep. And he is about to start flashing back to what happened. What turned him into this emotional wreck that can barely function as a person. What caused this? Snow falls heavily from the sky, blotting out the landscape ahead with a vague, fuzzy haze. The cold bites at our noses, seeping through my heavy gloves to nibble viciously at numbed fingers that can barely move anymore. The wind, soft though it might be, is a scathing chill that haunts through our beards, our hair, which are near enough frozen from the snow already. A few of the lads with me are coughing heavily and will need to be taken to a chiromancer once we return to the city. Ahead, the captain holds up a gauntleted fist, signalling for us to come to a halt. Embarrassing. I pull in beside him, slightly behind and to the right, while the lads fall in behind us, 18 of them in total. I am second in command of a squad of 8, my boys stamping through the icy tundra on this night of winter's hold. Why we're out here? The captain won't say, but it must have something to do with these Imperials who've taken over the Northlands within the last few months. Story is that Stannis Pass is holding out against them, but I can't help but feel it's only a matter of time before that city caves into their siege as well. Keep those costs down, you idiots, the captain growls in as low a quiet voice as he can manage. We don't want anyone to hear us out here. But Captain, one of the men hisses, no one will be able to see us out here. Ageless. I don't even know what silly bastard other than our lot would be out in weather like this. Aye, fess up. What's the dice? Why are we out here? Another pipes up. I'll tell you once we reach the target, and not before, the captain says in a tight voice. He seems irritated that they're questioning, and all things considered, I can see why. Until then, shut your yaps and follow my lead. There are a few annoyed sighs and grunts from the squad, but no one voices any actual protest. Given the events of the last few months, everyone is frayed, strung out, and wants nothing more than a good long rest. The bitterness at being conquered is still strong on our tongues. I look up to the sky and I see a swirling vortex of grey cloud, roiling in a peculiar inverted funnel up towards a core of utter blackness. Though a frown creases my face as I try to work out what this is, my mind screams with recognition, for I know this phenomenon. I've seen it before and I've come to fear it. It has haunted me for the last 20 years, night after night, almost without fail. So I'm just going to tweak my mirror just a bit, just to kind of pull it in and mean that I'm not kind of leaning my eyes over this way so much. Hold on, chat. Give me a second. There we go. Alright, there we are. Sounds about that. This is the place I have come to know as Dream Oblivion, a torment for the sins of my past, the penance for my actions before I became an Umbral Shield. Night after night, actions are repeated as they have been for 2 decades, as the players take their places and repeat their lines, exactly as I know they will. Leaden feet begin to drag past through the deep snow, reaching nearly halfway to our knees and showing no signs of abating, a relentless flurry that threatens to drown the Northlands beneath a pale blanket. The landscape before my eyes is starting to distort again, with bare-branched trees beginning to twist and warp, the leafless ends of each twig reaching out, clawing at me as if demanding I enter their embrace. The wintry fog that hides us from the view of any nearby wraps around my neck, ephemeral hands that wish to throttle me, to strangle me for what I'll soon do. Perhaps it's all I really deserve. Of our squad, 10 carry heavy crossbows. Longbows would be too bulky out in weather like this, though I can't see how a crossbow will be any more durable against these conditions. The rest of us bear sword and shield. Exactly why we're out here? The captain hasn't told us, though a few of the lads have come up with theories and ideas, each of them less believable than the last. At any rate, we're here to follow orders, and follow them we shall, to the letter, even if our actions follow us into the Everblack. I can only presume that the others go through what I do, that is, after tonight. I won't see any of them for some weeks, and once our unit's disbanded for what went off, I won't see them again at all. Even the faces of my companions begin to change, to warp into something inhuman, and yet as they always don't notice, but why would they? This is a construct of my own mind, a torment imposed by the actions I'll soon relive. One crossbowman begins to grow a cage made of bone that encases his entire head, his face and neck twitching horrifically in ways that a man was never meant to move. The man next to me has steam pouring from his eye sockets while the eyes themselves have melted and are spilling down his chin into the snow beneath in a ceaseless torrent, melting great holes into the ever-growing white carpet. And the captain's limbs are beginning to distort, extra joints appearing at random intervals, fingers bending back onto the knuckle and knotting through themselves. "Hold up," the captain hisses, his tongue that of a snake as he looks around, extending impossibly to tease at the top of his boots. Gristek up ahead. Let's wait for him to pass by. In the waking world, a Gristek stands twice the size of a man, a hulking mass of muscle with those disproportionately long arms and a mouthful of heavy teeth. The great apes of the plains usually feed on plants, but come winter when all that lies beneath several feet of snow, they'll take any food they can get, be it plant, animal, or man, sometimes even each other. But in this unreality, it stands nearly doubly as tall and broad as it would otherwise be, a massive shadow stamping through the haze ahead of us, large enough to swallow a man in one gulp. We stop dead in our tracks. My breath's as quiet as I can bring them to be, my heart pounding in my ears. A warm, oozing trickle drips from them and into my beard. I've never dared to dab my finger at it to see what it might be. The Gristek is gone as soon as it appeared, and we carry on. The landscape jumps, warping into the brow of a hill where 3 dead trees stand as their own headstones. The crossbowmen have split into 2 groups of 5 and taken up positions looking down into a small valley in which sits a settlement of yurts and tents. We can somehow see straight through the choking fog, though the men and women going about their day's business in the little village can't see us. The snow is at last beginning to relent. We shiver as we wait for the captain's signal. "Captain, you going to tell us what it is we're doing here?" I ask him through teeth that chatter so hard I fear one may shatter. The captain fixes me a look, but then his gaze shifts immediately with a heavy breath. "I suppose there's no harm in it." His reply comes eventually, though his tone lends to reluctance. "We're taking that settlement out. Imperials want the blueskin presence in the hills reduced. There's other squads doing the same thing tonight as us." The lads hiss their displeasure at that. No one cares for the Rafka, but we've always existed peaceably enough with them. Some even live within the city alongside us. But that'll all change once this goes ahead. "You can't be serious, Captain." "Why would they want to do that?" one of the men asks. "Not for us to question. All you need to know is that we're for it if we don't deliver on what the Zitharans want. They want these blueskins dead, and we're going to give them a pile of dead blueskins. Understand?" "I don't." The words begin spilling from my lips before I stop them. "We're here to murder unarmed civilians, women and children. Where's the honour in that? Where's the righteousness? Where's the 'you'll do as you're ordered', or you'll swings for the gallows from insubordination?" The captain seethes, the veins bulging out of his neck, writhing beneath the skin like malevolent worms, threatening to burst through and lunge straight for my face. "Now, crossbows. Take your places. 2 volleys, then the melee charges. Once you've packed the range kit down, you join us in cleanup. You got it?" A sullen, disbelieving chorus of "Aye" goes up from the squad. None of us can quite come to terms with what's about to happen. None of us will for the rest of our lives. I heard some years after this night that the captain wound up swinging himself from the supporting beam of his own bedchamber. Doesn't surprise me. I entertained such thoughts as that for a while. For a long while. The crossbowmen take their place, pulling their heavy cranks into place quickly despite the bitter cold, the taut strings creaking under new tension. I draw my sword from its scabbard quietly. Any overly loud noise could alert the blueskins in that little village. I fight the urge to spit my disgust off to the side, instead adjusting the light iron-studded wooden shield on my left arm into a more comfortable position. 2 volleys, then we charge. The moment is terse as we await the signal to begin killing. The heaviness in my heart is palpable. These Ravka aren't warriors, they're farmers, sheep herders, all of them non-combatants. We've never killed civilians before, not unless dealing with a full-blown riot or a revolt in some form. Crossbows, fire! The air around me is filled with the thrum of heavy bolts firing. For a few blissful seconds, I hear nothing but the sound of my own breath. And then come the cries as bolts impact flesh. Cries of pain, rage, and fear erupting from the village. Cries that only get louder as the second volley speeds into their midst. Almost as soon as the crossbows had unleashed their second salvo, those of us in the melee group charge down the hill as fast as we can. As fast as we are able in this heavy, settled snow. Blades ready to kill. Bloodlust beginning to boil upon the trepidation that I know we all feel. Time slows to a crawl as the charge rumbles forward. The sword in my hand whispers to me, craving that I use it, that I feed it. The soil beneath my feet cries out for murder, for blood. But the haze is still so thick I could bite into it. I can see through it as clearly as from the hilltop. Several bodies already lie dotted around, with those who are not so badly injured as to be incapacitated try to stand, to flee. I learned later that there are perhaps 50 Ravka here, and none wears more than their traditional leather trousers. No armour, no weapons. There's no honour in this. There's only sorrow and misery! But in the end, is it ever any different with war? Perhaps not. But at least fighting a man who holds a chance again you bears some mark of honour. This is just murder! The first blueskin is before me, a man at least 30 years my elder, whose eyes speak both of disbelief and horror as my sword takes him in the neck. The warning he'd been about to shout never comes beyond a gurgle that brings blood frothing to his lips. From here, as ever, the scene blurs, one face turning quickly to another. There is fire. Fire! As if we mock the heavens themselves. We somehow manage to light some of the yurts, which burn brightly within the fog. Anguished, agonised screams come from within. There are Ravka inside, ones destined to die in one of the worst manners imaginable. Give me a second, I'm just going to take a quick swig of my drink. Whoop. Some of the women huddle with their children, attempting in vain to protect them with their bodies, and these we run through. A few of the menfolk take up sticks or farming tools to try and beat us back, but how can they hope to stand before trained soldiers in full armour? A pitchfork against a sword and shield is no contest, and so they also die. It takes such a brief time to slaughter the village that my sword arm isn't even tired when the last blueskin in sight is looking sightlessly towards the stars. A sound catches my attention, and I turn towards a yurt that bears an odd glyph, one that I've never seen before. The Ravka style of writing is harsh, even compared to the brutal and simple Skjoli manner, with sweeping, blade-like curves on the letters as opposed to our solid and heavy lines. This one, though, I've never seen before. Later, after this night is done, I learned that it is the Ravka glyph for shaman. She lies dead not far away, but her yurt is yet to be put for the flame. The sound from within is that of whimpering, a deafening clamour to my ears amidst the chaos surrounding me. How I heard the noise above the roaring flames enveloping the homes around me, the shouting of my fellows and the screams of the dying, I still don't know. But hear it I do, and with blade upraised, I move cautiously towards the shaman's yurt. A child steps out, grimy face marred with tears, confused and alone. She can't be more than 5 or 6 years old. She hasn't seen me, by some strange chance, and doesn't notice until I'm upon her, my shield dropping from my left hand, landing with a soft sound in the drifts beneath me. My hand reaches out to grab the child about the neck and lifts her into the air. Her whimpering has ceased, replaced instead with wide-eyed, silent terror. Her small chest rises and falls as rapidly as her lip quivers, though fear has stilled her tongue. The pleading look in those eyes tells me I shouldn't do what I'm about to, that it is wrong! But I am a man who always follows orders, no matter my personal views on them. I draw my hand back, the tip of the sword now pointing towards the child. For the longest moment, in reality, mere seconds, I'm still, as is the child, her large and liquid eyes locked into mine. And then she speaks. The words are in the Ravka tongue, but their meaning is somehow clear to me. In the midst of all the heartache, Look for the roses. My blade springs forward, and her voice is cut off in a strangled grunt that bubbles away with a gurgle. I heft my blade with both hands until it is overhead, and watch as the child's body slides down the length of the steel. And then, she comes to rest at the hilt. And when she has reached that, she looks up and lunges at me. That was unpleasant to read. That was very uncomfortable to read. And I tell you why. Because that entire section is a character reliving such a horrific thing that they were made to do. And I think the thing with that character is you have to realise that he wishes that he was brave enough to have died rejecting that order. But he wasn't. He was too cowardly to reject that order at the time it was given. Worked great as an audiobook. That's a compliment and a half. Thank you. That's a big compliment, actually. I'll take it. I'll take it. But yeah, he was too cowardly to die. And that's a theme with the other main character as well, is she was too cowardly to die. She was too scared to die and suffers for that fact. But they go in different ways. One goes on an arc of revenge. One tries to attain redemption. Professional voice acting would be great for the scene. Oh, mate, imagine that scene like voiced by Wes Johnson. Imagine having an audiobook of like my novel. That's a dream. That's a dream and a half. But yeah, I mean, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it made you feel profoundly uncomfortable as well, because that's the point. That scene is not meant to be enjoyable. That scene is meant to be very much the opposite of enjoyable. It's meant to make you recoil into, Jesus, what the fuck? Because that's exactly what that character is thinking. He's seeing this happen again and again. He sees that scene every single night, and he cannot find peace because he sees that every single night. He tries to drink himself into a stupor. The dream haunts him. He tries to take his own life at various points. He can't. His vow stops it. He sees that every single night. He cannot escape from his own guilt. The only thing he can do is try to make tomorrow better, and to try and somehow atone for what he's done, with the knowledge that he never will be able to. And that was a very big part of writing him, is that particular, not survivor's guilt, but the guilt of knowing that he didn't do the right thing. And now he has to live with that for the rest of his days. And it gets to the point where he's no longer a death seeker. He doesn't actively try to die. But at the same time, he doesn't really have very much care for his own life anymore. He doesn't really care about himself anymore. The main character is much less pleasant. There's a scene, one of the scenes I was asked to read by one of my readers was a scene where the main character has just come back from death, empowered by a mad goddess, and they proceed to go on a killing spree around a brothel, which is being run by very nasty exploitative bastards. And they get what they deserve. They absolutely get what they deserve. But that entire scene is so graphic and horrible in terms of what the main character does to the people running this brothel that I think I'd get banned from Twitch if I read it. I think I'd actually get banned. It's very explicit. Like, it's so violent. But then at the same time, the whole thing there is that these people actually deserve it for what they're doing. They deserve this. So yeah, my voice actually kind of hurts now. So we're going to wrap things up there. I hope tonight has been insightful for you guys, by the way. I hope that this has given you a good insight into what I like about books and a bit about my writing style as well. If anyone wants to know where to find the book, I will give you enough clues on Discord to be able to find it, so just ping me if you fancy. I'm going to go rest my voice now. I actually need to go clean the cat litter trays out a bit. So, we're going to be live tomorrow, 5 PM with Dyson Sphere Program. My schedule for the rest of the coming week, I haven't worked out yet, but I'm probably going to do something like Monday, Thursday, Saturday. I've got band practice on Wednesday. I've got a gig on Friday next week over at Sheffield Corp. That should be fun. Is it Corp? Yeah, we're playing with Caligram. So I'll put a schedule up on Sunday, but it might be one of those schedules where everything's just kind of a bit TBC. Now, we do have a fair few people here, so let me just see. Is there anyone online I can plunder right now? Any of my mates are on? Ooh, yeah, breeze on. Right, okay, we're going to go plunder my friend Brielle, the microwave. Hold on, so it's /raid Brielle VT. Right, so she's playing Valorant at the minute. I hope that you enjoy her stream. Thank you for hanging out with me tonight. I'd be obliged if you gave Brie a follow as well. She's much more sizable in following than little old me, but you'll find out why very shortly. There's good reason for that, and she's pretty great. So behave yourselves in her chat, please. Don't make me look bad. We're going to pull the trigger on this now. So we are preparing. We ready up, guys? Yeah, let's do it. All right, good, excellent. Okay. We're going to pull the trigger in 3, 2, 1. Let's go!